My name's Christine and I have officially survived the Sew Your Stash challenge for 2022. And I loved doing the Sew Your Stash challenge this year because it really helped push my creativity and get me to sew things that I wouldn't normally have sewn out of certain fabrics, and to also sew with certain fabrics that were really old and had been sitting in my stash collecting dust for a few years. And since I loved participating in Sew Your Stash so much, I just wanted to share with you my 5 favorite things I have sewn as a part of the Sew Your Stash challenge. If you're not familiar with Sew Your Stash, it's basically a challenge you can give yourself to sew fabric in your fabric stash without buying new fabric to replace it. This can help you reduce the size of a huge fabric stash, but it can also push you to use some really old fabric, or use some fabric that you're too scared to use, or it can give you that final push to just make a project you've been putting off for a while. But my favorite benefit personally is that it really helped me bring out my creativity. And the most creative project I sewed this year was this wall hanging that I made entirely out of fabric scraps. Weaving all these fabric scraps into a new textile was a really fun, calming, and therapeutic process, but it was also really nostalgic to see all these different fabric scraps from different projects I had made in the past. I also had the least amount of expectations for this project going into it because I really had no idea how it would end up looking when I was done with it. But I absolutely love it, and now that I have my own sewing room, it's definitely going to go on one of these walls once I get this room put together. But the most functional sewing project I made this year was this set of 9-patch quilt block pillows I made. I really loved these fabrics individually, but I never thought of pairing them together until I did the Sew Your Stash challenge. So I think doing the Sew Your Stash challenge really helped me even come up with a design to make these pillows in the first place. But what makes them so useful is I set them on this old recliner we have that's really uncomfortable, just as a decorative thing in the living room. And as soon as we sat on this recliner with these pillows, we realized they give magical lumbar support when you're in that recliner, and they are now a complete set with that recliner. And the main reason why they're so comfortable as lumbar support is I stuffed them with fabric scraps rather than polyfill, so they're really dense and firm pillows that don't lose their shape and can actually provide a lot of support. So while you can use the tutorial I made for this project to help you assess your sewing skills and see how good you are and how much progress you're making, these are also really good for lumbar support. The oldest piece of fabric from my fabric stash that I pushed myself to sew with this year due to the Sew Your Stash challenge was this beautiful and comfy and functional swimsuit cover-up. I originally bought this spiderwebby meshy material in 2013, 2014, and I wanted it to make exactly what I made here, but I didn't have the sewing skills to make what I wanted to make at that time, so I stuck it in the bottom of my fabric stash and never did anything with it. And I'm really glad that I pushed myself to actually make something with it because it was a lot easier than I thought it was gonna be. And as I said in the video where I made this swimsuit cover-up, I actually like to wear these over a pair of shorts and a tank top, or over a sundress in the summer, and I actually did that a bunch this year because it was super hot. So this was actually a really good project for me to make, and probably out of everything I made this year, I've probably worn this the most. The most unexpected project I made was this Renaissance era chemise, because I was originally planning to use this fabric for a quilt, but when I found out it was linen, I decided to make a chemise instead, and then immediately jumped into making it. But I'm really glad I made this Renaissance era chemise, because my video tutorial for this is by far my best YouTube video so far, and all of the comments you guys gave me on that video have been really encouraging to keep me going and making more videos for you. So while I originally had no intention of making a Renaissance era chemise this year or making one out of this fabric, I'm really glad I made it because it was really helpful to a lot of you guys, and I know some of you even used this tutorial to make your own chemises to actually wear to a Renaissance festival this year. Making this chemise was definitely the most beneficial for you guys, so for that I'm really glad that I made it this year. And we're out of daylight, so now I have really gross fluorescent lighting that is going to need to be changed when I redo this sewing room. And my fifth favorite sewing project I made this year, which is probably my favorite out of everything I made here, is this quilt that I made using fabric that I inherited from my Aunt Heidi's fabric stash. I would never buy these colors or prints of fabric, so being able to use them in a way that I actually really like, I think was a really good example of how the Sew Your Stash challenge has pushed my creativity and it made me a little better at sewing, a little better at patterning and color matching and, you know, other factors that go into sewing as well. But I think the best thing about making this quilt was when I called my grandma and told her that I finished making that quilt I was making with Heidi's fabrics, and she kind of gasped and she was all excited and she was telling me about the fabrics that she still had too. So I think that was just a really good bonding moment with my grandma, and I'm glad that I got to make her happy by telling her I made this quilt. And as far as Sew Your Stash goes, this is the only sewing project I made with a new fabric. I did go to a thrift store to find a quilt backing for this quilt, and I did find this beautiful pink tablecloth that is the only thing I found that really would look good with all these different colors. And since I really wanted a quilt backing that my aunt would have liked and would have approved of, I think it's perfectly fine to break the Sew Your Stash challenge just a little bit to go buy a quilt backing from a thrift store for her. And at the start of the Sew Your Stash challenge, I did give myself one cheat day to go to the fabric store if I needed it, and I ended up not going to the fabric store. Instead, on that day when I went to the Goodwill to look for quilt backing, I bought a few other used secondhand pieces of fabric. So I think even though I did go to the store and buy fabric, it's still not technically new fabric. And all the fabric that I bought in that trip does fit in one plastic bag, so I did not buy more fabric than I used this year, and I didn't buy more fabric than I can easily store, because my whole goal for this was to use up some fabric in my storage space so that I didn't have to store as much of it. And while I'm not going to be doing the Sew Your Stash challenge next year, I do like the idea of using more fabric than I buy, just so that I'm not building a huge fabric stash that I'm not using, and so I can push myself to use more fabrics that I already have that I bought because I loved them and I want to actually be able to wear them or use them in some way. And even though it wasn't a part of the Sew Your Stash challenge this year, I wanted to share with you this gorgeous, crazy old cat lady cape that I crocheted with dollar store yarn this week. And I tried to wear a light colored dress underneath it today so I could show you guys like the texture that the little loops made, but last night I wore this out to dinner over just a black maxi dress, and my husband was like, "You look like one of those cat ladies that works at a gothic oddity shop," and I was like, that's exactly what I was going for. So project successful. This yarn is super soft and fluffy, and it hasn't shed a whole lot, and I just hope it retains that and is a good quality yarn, even though I got it at the dollar store, because I really like the way this turned out, and I think it's really soft and elegant and beautiful, and I'm really glad that I made it. And no, there will not be a video tutorial on how to make this, because honestly I hadn't crocheted in years before I started this, and I haven't had the ability to sit down and make a video or a tutorial up until this point, because as soon as we moved into this house, our septic tank backed up and flooded a good chunk of it, and we've been dealing with demolition, we've been dealing with insurance companies, the contractor, we've had a lot of problems, and we're still having problems getting enough money to recover all the damage that was caused. We also took a while getting out of the apartment because we were instead dealing with cleaning up this house, and I'm still not unpacked with anything. And this was the first day that I was able to even find my tripod and my camera and get enough set up so that I could even make just a simple video for you guys today. And I don't want to get into all of that right now because it's really stressful and it's still ongoing. I want to end this year on all the stuff I made that I was happy I made, and stuff that's soft and it makes me happy to wear, and I want to end on a good note. So it was really good for me to just sit down and spend a few days crocheting and being artsy and craftsy and working on something that I actually really liked the end result with and is totally wearable. So if you want to use some cheap yarn or better quality yarn, that would be fine too. Go get yourself some really soft plushy yarn and make yourself a really fun crazy cat lady cape like this one. And there you have it. That's my result of the Sew Your Stash Challenge 2022. If you guys have any questions about doing the Sew Your Stash Challenge, or you want to do it yourself, let me know down in the comments. And I do highly encourage you to try it because it was really, really good for me to do this year, and I think it would benefit you as well. And if you liked watching me do the Sew Your Stash Challenge this year, please do leave a like on this video and hit subscribe if you want to see more sewing projects, because I'm planning to do a lot more sewing in the new year. Thank you for watching my video, everyone. I will see you guys as soon as I possibly can. I promise I am working on getting this quilt video done for you, and you will be able to see it soon. I hope you guys all stuck with your New Year's resolutions this year, and I hope you have a very happy New Year. Oh, Kojo, you okay, bud?